Today, professional football is defined by its geometry. Every blade of grass is cut to a specific height, and every movement is monitored by a centralized network of officials and cameras to ensure absolute order. But the act of kicking a ball originated long before any rulebooks existed. Between 300 and 500 BC, Chinese soldiers practiced a military exercise called Tsu Chu, literally translating to kicking the ball with feet. By the time the concept reached medieval England, it had devolved into absolute chaos. What they called mob football was essentially a massive, rolling brawl across towns and fields, sometimes involving up to 500 players at a time. These matches were so destructive that the game had its own dedicated day of dread. On Football Tuesdays, local shopkeepers routinely boarded up their windows to protect their livelihoods from the stampeding crowds. The violence reached such a peak that the English monarchy intervened. King Edward II explicitly banned the sport in 1314, and Henry VIII later threatened anyone caught playing with a week in prison. Yet the threats of imprisonment failed to stop people from playing. For this violent pastime to survive and eventually become a marketable global spectacle, the raw brawling had to be stripped away and replaced by a unified system of law. The first serious attempts to tame the sport began in the mid-19th century. Sheffield FC formed in 1857, and by 1863, the London Football Association finally published the sport's first standardized public rules, putting an end to the free-for-all era. To see how lawmakers engineered the physical pitch, we can look at its evolving layout. Early goals were simply two posts connected by a flimsy ribbon, which made judging heights nearly impossible. In 1875, that ribbon was replaced by a solid wooden crossbar. By 1891, officials added two more features to eliminate disputes over scoring: the woven goal net to physically catch the ball, and the penalty kick to punish defensive fouls near the goal line. The mechanics of the players were systematically locked down as well. The 11-player limit was strictly mandated, and by 1909, goalkeepers were forced to wear a distinctly colored shirt so referees could instantly identify them in a crowded box. To guard this growing framework of geometry and regulations, 4 distinct British associations combined their power in 1886 to form the International Football Association Board. As the sport expanded outward, that local governing body laid the groundwork for an even larger authority. In 1904, FIFA was created to govern this complex mechanical rulebook on a worldwide scale. The British had successfully engineered a neatly packaged, exportable product. But as the empire carried this heavily regulated game across the globe, that rigid structure was about to collide with players who had entirely different ways of playing. The sport took early root in India. By 1888, the mountain town of Shimla hosted the inaugural Durand Cup, making it the second oldest football tournament on the planet. 6 decades later, the game had fully embedded itself in the local culture. When the 1948 London Olympics opened, a newly independent Indian national team arrived to test themselves on the global stage. When they walked onto the pitch to face France, the contrast was jarring. The European squad arrived with the required heavy boots and standard equipment, while the Indian players took the field entirely barefoot. The Indian team lost the match 2-1, but their ability to trap, pass, and shoot a heavy leather ball without any protective footwear stunned the international crowd. They proved that raw, unequipped skill could go toe-to-toe with European standardization. This performance established a momentum that carried the team into a decade of regional success. Within 3 years, in 1951, the Indian team secured the gold medal at the very first Asian Games held in New Delhi. Their absolute statistical peak arrived at the 1956 Melbourne Olympics. By crushing the host nation Australia 4-2, India became the first Asian country in history to reach an Olympic semi-final. The final chapter of this golden era played out against the backdrop of the 1960 Rome Olympics. Led by Captain P.K. Banerjee, the Indian squad fought a heavily favored French team to a bitter 1-1 draw. Despite these high-profile performances, the match in Rome remains a historical milestone. It marks the last time the Indian men's football team successfully qualified for the Olympic Games. British associations and FIFA provided the laws and the geometry that manage the sport today. However, the success of India's barefoot squad in the 1950s suggests that the game's global expansion relied less on its rigid codes than on the fact that the skill required to play was already universal.